In the last couple of times that we were able to be together, and I apologize for the last couple of weeks here, we talked about three guys named James that many people down through the ages have tried to turn into two guys named James and three guys named Judas, and the impulse in later years to simplify that. And this morning I want to start by going back and talking about seven women named Mary. Which, of course, also down through the ages, people have looked to simplify and reduce this by combining some of these people into the same person. To cut this list from 7 Marys to 5 or 4 or something a little bit more manageable, and where the same people keep showing up in the narrative. That's an impulse that goes down through the history of the church. Is to want to simplify the story and thereby connect a bunch of these people. But these are 7 Marys in the New Testament. Mary was the most popular female name in Judea and Galilee in the first century. It's estimated that about 20% of female children in that time and place were named Mary. So yeah, like kind of Muhammad today in the Islamic world among young men, Mary was omnipresent as a female name, super common. And so this is part of the reason that we see so many women named Mary in the New Testament, because there were so many women named Mary in the culture at that time. I did a quick look for, in the Roman Catholic tradition, women known as Saint Mary. I came up with a list of 10 in like less than 5 minutes. So Saint Mary is perhaps the most common name in the Roman Catholic pantheon of saints as well. And so we have a great many Marys to think about, women named Mary, but they're individuals and they matter individually. And so I wanted to spend a few minutes trying to clarify for our minds a little bit who these different people are, who these different women are, and why they're individually important to the story. So Mary, the mother of Jesus, obviously super important for a wide variety of reasons, and we're here as we are at Christmas, a huge part of that story. But the teenage mother of Jesus. A couple things to be thinking about when you read this story, the nativity story in Matthew and in Luke. In Matthew, Matthew makes the case that Jesus is born under Herod the Great. He refers to King Herod repeatedly in the story. Herod died in 4 BC. Okay, this is well attested by multiple sources in the Roman world and elsewhere, Josephus' history, etc. That Herod died in 4 BC is not controversial. And there is really no argument that that is true. And so if Jesus is born under Herod the Great, as Matthew says, and as the story in Matthew, of course, includes the massacre of the children in Bethlehem by Herod, that puts Jesus born in 5 BC. And for purposes of thinking about Mary, it means that Mary is born in about 20 BC. Because she was 15, 16, so she might have been a little older than that, but probably not a lot. So around 20 BC would be when Mary was born, and so that's when she would show up in the timeline. 20 BC or a little bit earlier. The challenge that we've had in terms of dating down through the ages, of course, is that Luke tells this story, and Luke connects it to Quirinius being the governor, the legate of Syria. Quirinius didn't become the governor of Syria until AD 6. He served as governor of Syria from 6 to 12 AD. Quirinius did. So and his service ended. He died in 12. But he was appointed because when Herod died in 4 BC, his will, his last will, and Herod had written a long series of wills where he had changed the balance of power among his various sons and wives by what he was doing with his proposals for what should happen after he died. But he made Caesar, Augustus Caesar, the Caesar of the time, his executor, basically, which as a client king was basically the fundamental way that things worked. So when Herod died, his will went to Rome. And his sons all went to Rome. And a couple of his wives went to Rome. And there was a hearing in front of the Senate that was hosted by Caesar Augustus as the presiding officer to decide whether he wanted to honor Herod's will, and if so, how. And Herod had set up a fairly complicated division of all the lands that the Romans had made him the client king of among 3 of his sons and his sister, who he had given a small piece of the pie to because she did not have an income otherwise. And so he had thought this out. And so Herod Archelaus, one of his sons, was the guy that he proposed to be the new client king, the ethnarch of Judea, and Herod Antipas in Galilee, his son there. Archelaus was not terribly effective in this role, and he was deposed in 6 AD, and that's why Quirinius was appointed governor. Quirinius came at the time that when Herod Archelaus was deposed by the Romans. Quirinius was sent to clean up the mess, and part of the task that Quirinius was given was to hold a census across the Syria, Judea, Galilee, that whole area, to reset the tax base and to ensure that the Roman interests were being effectively cared for there. So after AD 6, there are no Herods with any authority in Judea for 20 years. And so when you read Luke, Luke says Quirinius initiates this census, and this is what sets the story in motion. Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem. So the challenge that we've had for 2 millennia is that the story of Herod the Great in Matthew and the story of Quirinius and the census in Luke don't quite fit together. They certainly don't fit together in obvious ways. And if you take Luke's timeline, then the census happens in late AD 6, and Jesus is born in December of AD 6 based on Luke's timeline, and then Mary is born in about 10 BC, not in 20 BC or before. So this plays into, some weeks back I showed you the pictures of the house of Mary on the hill overlooking Ephesus, ancient Ephesus, and I've been there, taken the tour. The current house, of course, was built in the 1950s, but it's built on a very ancient foundation, and it goes way, way back. The question, of course, for down through the ages has been, what happened to Mary when she got old? We see her at the crucifixion. We see her at the resurrection. We see her with the church in Acts chapter 1, in Acts chapter 2, and then we don't know. So if she went to Ephesus with John, one of the challenges that we run into about that is Paul writes 2 Timothy to Timothy in Ephesus and greets people in Ephesus and sends greetings from Rome in AD 64. And one of the people that he doesn't greet or mention at all in 2 Timothy is John, the apostle, which has long been taken as evidence that John wasn't in Ephesus until the late 60s. Now, if Mary's born in 10 BC and John didn't show up in Ephesus until 65 or so, she would have been at least 75 when they went there. If Mary's born in 20 BC, she's 85 before they went to Ephesus. An 85-year-old woman did not make a long trip very often in the first century. So this is one of the reasons why the connection of Mary to Ephesus is a little tenuous here, because the timing would make her very old. And a woman that the Bible says, the New Testament says, that she gave birth at least 7 times. This is not trivial, particularly in the first century. So a woman who gave birth 7 times and then lived into her 80s might be, yeah, let's go. Let's take a long trip. She might be healthy and all that, but the odds of that are not all that great. So we don't know the details of what the rest of Mary's life looks like, but she was an important figure in the life of the church from early times, and great traditions grew up around her, as we previously discussed, in later decades and years and centuries. And those have continued to grow. Some of the important traditions about Mary today date from the 19th and 20th century. So these are things that the strength of the perception that Mary is a very, very important part of the story has continued to grow over the years. So what about Mary Magdalene? Mary Magdalene is a very prominent convert, subject to very many traditions and stories down through the years. And one thing that we know for certain is that she's from Magdala. Magdala is a small village on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, so a Galilean. You can go see the ruins of the ancient village of Magdala today. Small place, a small town girl, as it were. She is the woman from whom 7 demons were cast out at the beginning of Luke chapter 8. That one story is very certain about her. Luke is very direct in his attribution that is Mary Magdalene. There has been a long belief that she maybe was the woman caught in adultery, but there's no direct connection to that. And no specific reason to believe that. That seems to be an assignment later on, once again, to try to simplify the story by reducing the cast of characters and coming up with a way to connect all this. There is a very long tradition about Mary Magdalene that she is a former prostitute. There is nothing in the New Testament that says that or that indicates that. But by sometime in the Middle Ages, that was a very, very common part of the story as it was related and as it spread across Europe. Mary Magdalene is important for quite a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that she's the one of the key figures who discovers the tomb to be empty on the resurrection morning. Now, this is a really unusual thing culturally, that the first witness would be a woman. At the time, Jews did not allow women to offer testimony in court in any kind of a court case. Women were not considered to be adequate as witnesses, as of the 2 or 3 witnesses of the Mosaic requirement. The Sanhedrin had imposed this idea that women were not acceptable as witnesses. And yet, who are the first witnesses to the resurrection? They're women. And so, as Christians, we find that, once again, the Christian story is countercultural with respect to the way that it treats women and the way that it thinks about women. Because the first witnesses, are women. And that is really culturally very different. And, if you were just writing a story that you were setting in this culture, you would never have women be the first witnesses. That's not the way that you would write the story in that culture. That's not the way that you would get traction and convince people that this was really true. So Mary Magdalene is very important because of that. She was a popular person in the 2nd and 3rd century, the Gnostic Gospels. The people that were writing gospel-like sort of stories that were circulating, mostly that were trying to say, cult groups today are what I call Christian Bible and groups. We believe the Bible and this, the Bible and that. The Gnostic groups in the 2nd and 3rd century were people that were like, we believe the gospel and this. You need this other stuff with your gospel. And so there was a lot of that because as the church grew, people saw the opportunity to get people to go off in directions that they thought were interesting. Mary Magdalene is a figure that a lot of these Gnostic Gospels choose to use. And Gnostic, we'll talk about this more as we go further, but the Gnostics gnosis, the idea of secret knowledge. She became one of the people that the Gnostic authors proposed had really secret knowledge. She had special knowledge. And this is part of the interesting thing about Mary Magdalene is there are some things about the way the New Testament tells her story which indicate that she understood stuff before most anybody else did. In particular, before a bunch of the guys on the 12 did. That she got it much quicker than they did. And as a result, Augustine called her the apostle of the apostles because Augustine made the case that she set an example of understanding, of faith, of trust for the 12 that was significantly influential to them in terms of their understanding. The medieval era, from late medieval era through about the 19th century, huge amount of Christian art that features Mary Magdalene. A lot of paintings and other representations include her. She's a topic of a lot of different stuff. Now, this is partly because she is often depicted with very long red hair, or otherwise, if she's not long red hair, it's usually blonde. But she is often depicted topless or only in her underclothes, so that's probably part of the fascination. People thought, based on the former prostitute story, they were able to include something a little bit more titillating in what they were doing. But there are numerous depictions down through the ages about her in tears. So many that they are the basis of the English word maudlin, which comes from Magdalene. Because she is so often depicted as a model of repentance, as somebody who understood her sin. In the more modern era, she is sometimes depicted as the wife or lover of Jesus. There is nothing whatsoever about that until about the 14th century. And that's a thing that particularly in the 19th and 20th century became a thing that people outside the church started to play around with. But there is nothing about that before about the 14th century. But Mary Magdalene is an important figure in the New Testament story and became an important figure in the church because of her early understanding, her early belief, her faithfulness, and the example that she set of a repentant heart and of her commitment as a disciple. So Mary of Clopas, in John 19, Mary of Clopas is one of the women at the crucifixion. And it's not clear whether of Clopas means the daughter of Clopas or of Clopas means the wife of Clopas. And that's been a question that people have pondered for 2 millennia. But the fact that she was at the crucifixion implies that she was either a very core believer of Jesus or that she was a very close supporter of Mary, his mother. That one of those two things is true, and maybe both of them. There's a long tradition that she was the sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus. We talked about that before, about the issue that perhaps mom had liked the name Mary so much, and it was so common that she named 2 of her daughters Mary. Yeah, I'm not buying that one. That seems like a step too far. But there's also a significant tradition that she's maybe the sister-in-law of Mary, the mother of Jesus. There is some early tradition that Clopas is the husband of Mary of Clopas, and Clopas is a brother of Joseph. So, and twice Matthew in his gospel uses the term the other Mary, which is not terribly helpful considering the number of Marys who are in the story. But Mary of Clopas may be the person that Matthew is referring to when he says the other Mary. But there's Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene, and Mary of Clopas, and all 3 of them are associated with both the crucifixion and the resurrection. And so when Matthew says the other Mary, it's a little bit difficult to know who he's referring to, but he wouldn't be referring to Mary, the mother of Jesus, and he uses Mary Magdalene when he speaks about her. So it's a different Mary than the 2 of them. So Mary of Clopas is a good guess. There's, of course, Mary, the sister of Martha. You remember the story of Mary and Martha, the sisters whose brother was Lazarus, whom Jesus raised from the dead. Mary and Martha and Lazarus are from Bethany, a village on the Mount of Olives opposite Jerusalem. Mary, of course, is the one who sat and listened. Jesus said she chose the better part. That is, she took the place of a disciple and sat at his feet to learn. When there was all kinds of reasons to be doing, she sat to listen and to learn. And this is a reminder to us, a reminder down through the ages, an example to us that our call is to be disciples and to make disciples. Go therefore and make disciples, disciplined learners, not converts, not church attenders, but disciples. People who sit at the feet of Jesus and listen and learn and grow and go and then do. So that is Mary, the sister of Martha. It is worth keeping in mind it seems that Jesus stays in the home of Mary and Martha of Bethany most of the time when he goes to Jerusalem. And during the Passion Week, it appears that he stays there. You know, as you read the chronicle of the Passion Week, he leaves the city at the end of each day, and he goes back into the city. So he's staying outside the city, and several of the activities that he's engaged in the Passion Week happen in Bethany. And so there's a good chance that he is staying with Mary and Martha in their home and going in and out of the city from there. In John chapter 12, Mary of Bethany is the woman who anoints Jesus with oil the week of the Passion. In Mark chapter 14, you've got the same story, which Mark says it happened at the house of a guy called Simon the leper. And if they went to his house for dinner, he was probably no longer a leper, but previously. And Mary goes unnamed in Mark's chronicle, but it's the same story, and it's still Mary of Bethany, in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, anointing Jesus with oil, and he says, she's anointing me for my death and my burial. And so this happens in the Passion Week. Pope Gregory I in the 6th century is the guy who started conflating Mary, sister of Martha, Mary of Bethany, with Mary Magdalene. But nobody before that tried to make those two women the same. But since then, there's been a lot of people who, because Gregory did that, have believed that to be true. We also have Mary, the mother of James. Mary, the mother of James the Less, or Mary, the mother of James and Joses, who is apparently the mother of James, the son of Alphaeus, one of the 12, and not the mother of James the Greater and John, the sons of thunder. The wife of Zebedee is believed to have been named Salome, although down through the ages, a lot of people have called her Mary Salome, because, everybody's named Mary, I guess. So she can be a Mary too. But Mary, the mother of James the Less, is also reportedly part of the group who were at the crucifixion and at the tomb, which gives us 4 Marys at the crucifixion, and maybe 4 Marys, at least 3 Marys at the tomb. So this is one of the reasons why this is a little bit difficult to keep track of. Then there's Mary, the mother of John Mark. Acts 12:12 tells us that John Mark's mother, Mary, hosted many activities and things in her home for the young church, which is one of the reasons that John Mark comes into the story. And apparently her home in Jerusalem was a large enough space that many people were able to gather there, and it was an important early gathering place for the church. Barnabas is John Mark's uncle, so Mary might have been Barnabas's sister, or maybe his sister-in-law. But we don't know anything else about Mary, the mother of John Mark, but she is a different person than these other Marys. And then in Romans 16:6, Paul writing to the Romans, AD 55, 58, probably from Corinth, so about a quarter century after the resurrection, plus or minus, Paul writes and mentions Mary of Rome. That is, he is writing at the beginning of chapter 16 about all the people he knows in Rome that he wants to thank or greet or honor or whatever. And Paul says, she has worked hard for you. And so he believed that this Mary was in Rome, and he knew that about her. And we don't know anything else, except this is like 55, 58. So this is more than 2 decades after the resurrection. So there's a chance that Mary of Rome is of another generation. If Paul's referring to a young woman who's like 25, then she was born around the time of the resurrection. And so, and unless she's an older woman, she is almost certainly a different Mary from these other 6. So, but we don't know anything about that, and we do know that she is physically placed at Rome. So those are 7 Marys in the New Testament who are part of this story, and who all have left a legacy for us in terms of the stories and the ways that they are engaged and involved here.